afternoon and welcome to City Club of Portland Friday Forum. City Club is where we bring civic-minded people together to make Portland and Oregon a better place for everyone to live, work, and play. I'm Karen Curvin, City Club President, and I would like to welcome members and guests alike, those of you who join us today at Sentinel Hotel, and those of you listening on OPB Radio or watching on Portland Community Media. Today, Brad Schmidt will moderate a discussion with Commissioner Steve Novick about the Portland transportation fee, but first, some announcements. The generous support of City Club's corporate and media partners ensures we put on the state's best civic programs week after week. I'd like to thank our media partners, including Oregon Business Magazine. Our current Friday Forum sponsors are Chevron, Girding Edlin, Morel Inc., Northwest Natural, Portland Timbers, and Schwabe Williamson and Wyatt. We are grateful for your support and commitment to City Club's mission. Please join me in a warm round of applause for all of them. City Club's annual membership drive is coming to a close soon, and we want you to join before it's too late, although it's never really too late. For 98 years, City Club has helped shape what Portland is today through research, advocacy, and public forums, and we are here to tackle the tough problems we face now. Government cannot solve these issues alone, nor should it. That's where our members come in, and why we need your support. City Club staff will be waiting in the back after the forum to sign you up as a member today. Join us at next week's Friday Forum for a conversation about the local efforts to end homelessness with Multnomah Chair-elect Deborah Kafoury, Commissioner Dan Saltzman, the Portland Housing Bureau, Street Roots, and Citizens Crime Commission. Also next week, you can join us for an evening forum that will explore the impacts on government and education when society confuses opinion with scientific facts. Also, we will host Pride Civic Drinks, where we will bring together LGBTQ organizations for Pride Month. Learn more about club events, purchase tickets, and become a member on our website, pdxcityclub.org. As always, City Club will be live tweeting at today's event. You can follow or mention us at PDX City Club, and be sure to follow the conversation by using the hashtag CityClub in your own tweets. We will have a question and answer session with Commissioner Novick at the end of today's program. Members, please come to the microphone to ask your question. For all of our audience members, please locate the index cards on the center of your tables and write your questions on them during the forum. Hold your cards up high and City Club staff will collect them prior to the start of Q&A. And now for our program. A vote by City Council on the Portland transportation fee was scheduled for this week, but now there is a delay until November while the city continues to solicit public input. Commissioner Novick will discuss his thoughts on the city's transportation maintenance needs, the process involved in finding a solution, and what lies ahead. Brad Schmidt will ask him a few questions, and we've set aside extra time for audience questions. Steve Novick is the commissioner in charge of the Portland Bureau of Transportation, the Bureau of Emergency Communications, and the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management. His early actions as a commissioner included bolting down his house in the event of a major seismic event, investigating the possible misuse of handicap parking permits, and leading the effort to put up a temporary barrier on the Vista Bridge. Novick, a former longtime Selwood Moreland resident, City Club member, now lives with his fiancée, Rachel Filofsky, and their Welsh Corgi Pumpkin in the Multnomah Village neighborhood. Brad Schmidt is a reporter at the Oregonian. In his 8 years at the paper, Schmidt has covered sports, law enforcement, and government, spending the past 4 years writing about Portland City Hall. His stories about subsidized housing and broken promises in East Portland have received regional journalism awards. Please help me welcome Commissioner Novick and Brad Schmidt to the stage.
Thank you so much. As always, it's a great honor and a pleasure to be at the City Club. So, why are we saying we need more money? What do we need it for? Well, we have a huge and growing maintenance deficit for our existing transportation system. There's also way too many places in Portland where it's not safe for kids to walk to school, it's not safe for seniors to walk to transit stations. The maintenance deficit is huge and growing. A year and a half ago, the auditor put out a report that said we would need an extra $75 million a year for 10 years to bring our streets up to decent condition. Recently, I asked my staff, that was a year and a half ago. How much would we need now? And they said, oh, now it's $91 million a year for the next 10 years to bring them up to decent condition. We've lost $160 million in 18 months. How's that possible? Well, it turns out that streets are like teeth. If you don't do regular brushing and flossing and cleaning, you wind up needing more expensive things like root canals and extractions. When a street just is beginning to show signs of wear, we can extend its life for another several years by putting down something called fog seal, which costs about $10,000 per lane mile to use. When a street gets to the point where it needs to have the top couple inches ground down and repaved, that costs at least $100,000 per lane mile. When a street gets to the point you have to dig it up and rebuild the whole thing, that's at least $1 million per lane mile. Every month, another street falls from one condition to another. Right now, on East Burnside between 20th and 41st, on Northeast Broadway between 15th and 33rd, on Hawthorne between 24th and Cesar Chavez, those need a grind and pave. We don't have the money to do it. If we don't get to them in another 10 years, they'll need to be completely rebuilt, like a big chunk of 23rd was several years ago. So, that's the maintenance part. We also have this huge safety deficit. One of the best things I've done as city commissioner was participate in a celebration at Prescott Elementary School at 105th and Prescott of the fact that we had recently filled in the sidewalks between 105th and 116th. We had parents coming up to us and saying, thank you, I can now walk my child to school. I don't get to go to enough of those celebrations. I'd like to be able to go to a similar celebration at Ron Russell Middle School in David Douglas District, at Sacramento Elementary in Park Rose, at Bridal Mile in Southwest. I won't get to do that unless we have more money. Now, didn't we used to have money? What happened? How have we gotten to this point? Well, the mayor likes to talk about the fact that the federal gas tax hasn't been adjusted for inflation since 1993, which is true. Another very important fact is that transportation used to get a big chunk of the money the city gets from utility license fees. As of 1985, I think transportation got about $12 million a year. Adjust that for inflation, we'd be getting $26 million a year. We actually now get about $2 million a year. But starting in the late 80s and into the 90s, the city took that money and put it into the general fund, which pays primarily for police, fire, and parks. Interesting thing is, there's people out there who remember the utility license fee money was taken, but they don't remember what it was taken for. I had a conversation yesterday with a respected figure in the Portland business world who said, if you do a street fee, you got to really dedicate it or it'll be stolen. You remember what happened to the utility license fees? And I said, you know, it would be interesting if some business folks like you stepped up and said, the money was taken for police, fire, and parks. Crime is down by over 30% in the last 20 years, and we still have the same size police force. Maybe we should have a discussion about that. And this person said, I'd rather talk about the whole budget, not just 3 bureaus. And I started to say, but wait a minute, those 3 bureaus are over 70% of the budget. And then it hit me. This is a really sophisticated person. But even this sophisticated person, at some point of the corner of their mind, thinks that we spend all of the money on other unimportant stuff. Because that's what most people believe. If you go to the Oregonian website right now, there's a poll. How should the city fund transportation? Sales tax, income tax, gas tax, or cut something else? They don't specify other things to cut. They don't say police, fire, or parks. If they did, I don't know how many people would volunteer. But over 60% in that unscientific poll right now are saying, cut something else. And why shouldn't people think that? That's what people hear constantly. The government spends all the money on other unimportant stuff. A few days ago, there was a letter to the editor in the Oregonian that said, they don't need a street fee. Why don't they just cut the money that they're spending on the youth pass? Well, the city is spending money on youth pass. Right now, it's a bit under $1 million. Again, $91 million a year annual pavement deficit. But there's no reason for that letter writer to know that youth pass is a small fraction of the budget. After all, the Oregonian had an editorial several days before chastising us for spending money on youth pass. And why would they write a whole editorial on it if it wasn't a huge amount of money? Then there's the way people report on the auditor's report on street maintenance. The way the story normally goes is the auditor said a year and a half ago that PBOT would have plenty of money if they just prioritized and didn't spend all their money on other unimportant stuff. You don't see a story listing the other stuff and adding up the amounts. If you actually look at the items the auditor highlighted, they were the Selwood Bridge, the streetcar, Portland-Milwaukee light rail, and a couple other things, sprucing up the downtown transit mall. Collectively, they add up to about $16 million. Again, the auditor herself said we need an extra $75 million a year just on pavement. But people think the auditor said we could solve all of our problems by cutting other unimportant stuff. And if you look at that stuff, I mean, the Selwood Bridge, technically it's a county responsibility. But the county doesn't have much money either. It is an important part of the city transportation system. And yes, Clackamas County should have paid their fair share. But Clackamas County refused. Now, I suppose we could have raised an army and invaded Clackamas County and conquered them and forced them to pay us tribute to pay off the Selwood Bridge. But if you've ever met John Ludlow, you know that's a tall order. And the cost of an occupying army is pretty high as well. Then there's the streetcar. I mean, by far, the two biggest items are the Selwood Bridge and the streetcar. I'll let the mayor defend the streetcar. It's his baby. I won't go into the lengthy explanation. But the streetcar cost us about $4 million. But I bet if you polled Portlanders and asked what percentage of the city transportation budget goes to the streetcar, my guess is they'd say about 50%. Because Brad Schmidt, our intrepid reporter, who's a really good reporter who writes fair stuff, and I like dealing with him, he writes half the articles about transportation in the Oregonian, and they're all about the streetcar. So the only reasonable conclusion to draw is that half our budget goes to the streetcar. So when people say that we should go to the voters and resolve this issue, what they're really asking is, we want you to go to the voters and overcome 35 years since Ronald Reagan of people being told that all the money is spent on other unimportant stuff. And you know, to paraphrase something Tommy Lee Jones said in The Fugitive, Charlie Hales and I, hey, we're pretty smart guys, aren't we? We're reasonably smart. I don't think we're that smart. We're not smart enough to overcome 35 years of people being told that all the money goes to other unimportant stuff. Thank you.
Wow, how to follow that. Well, thank you for taking the time to sit down and talk with us, Commissioner Novick.
Thank you, Brad.
First, start off the bat, let's talk about what the auditor did say. Her report said the present poor condition of many streets and the high future costs to improve them is a direct consequence of deferring maintenance in favor of other spending choices. Do you disagree with that statement?
Well, I would point out that the auditor said that we needed an extra $75 million a year over 10 years to bring the streets up to good condition, and the specific things that she complains about add up to about $16 million a year. Now, to a great extent, I actually agree with the auditor sort of strategically. I think that instead of volunteering to spend $75 million on the Selwood Bridge, no disrespect, Mayor Adams, but I would have loved it if you had pushed for, where is Mayor Adams anyway? There he is. I think that a campaign to raise money for transportation, which highlighted the need to replace the Selwood Bridge, would have been great, because people understood the Selwood Bridge needed to be replaced. But, that was a tactical call that he made, and I'm sure he had good reasons. The streetcar. I personally have argued that the general fund should pay for a good chunk of the streetcar, because the streetcar is largely a development tool which raises property values, which leads to more property taxes, which were down to the general fund, not to transportation. So I do think that the general fund should be picking up a chunk of streetcar. It shouldn't come, all the operations costs shouldn't come out of our and TriMet's budget. Portland-Milwaukee light rail, that costs us $2.5 million a year. Again, maybe we should have ensured that we had a funding mechanism for maintenance, which Earl Blumenauer told me he's been worried about since the 1980s, before we paid our share of Portland-Milwaukee Light Rail. So the auditor has some points, but they only go so far. I think if you ask the auditor, would PBOT be just fine and would the streets be great if they hadn't spent the money on the things I specifically criticized, I think she would have to say no.
The auditor also found that the city had no long-term plan to reconcile competing transportation priorities. As a result, new transportation projects have displaced core services such as maintaining streets. The auditor recommended that PBOT create an overall transportation strategy to identify how it plans to balance preservation of existing infrastructure against new transportation development. It's my understanding that the city did not yet create that transportation strategy. Why not?
Well, we are developing it, and if you look at the way we've explained how we expect to spend the money from the street fee, after consulting with our advisory committee, our preliminary assumption is that over the next 5 years, we'll be spending about 54% on maintenance. And maintenance, by the way, is not just the pavement, it's the signals, it's the street lights, it's the signs, which I'm getting too old to read given how faded they are. So we anticipate that we're spending about 54% on maintenance, most of which will go to pavement, most of which will go to the busiest streets, and about 43% on safety, by which we mean putting in sidewalks for kids to walk to school, putting in flashing beacons at dangerous intersections, and so on and so forth. So that is how we plan to prioritize the money from the street fee. Now, when you go to town halls, by the way, most of the people who came said, forget maintenance, most of it should go to safety. And when you go and talk to business groups, a lot of them say, look, it all needs to go to maintenance. And the problem, I mean, it is true that the money we're raising won't address all of our maintenance needs. But if we spent all of our money on maintenance, then we'd be, as advocates for low-income folks and people in East and Southwest Portland point out, we'd be locking in existing inequities. We'd only be maintaining the infrastructure that the lucky people already have. We wouldn't be building the sidewalks that, as you pointed out, actually, Brad, in your reporting, people in East Portland need.
Following up on that, do you believe that the city should create that transportation strategy?
I believe, yes, that we should take what we're doing on the street fee and sort of extend it to the whole Bureau and be able to say, this is our overall strategy. But I think that what we're saying about how we spend the street fee money is a pretty good indicator of where we're going.
The city's roads actually got worse year to year, according to PBOT's most recent report. In this year's budget, only about $11 million is going towards street maintenance, which is about on par with what it was last year. Given $91 million in annual needs, is there anything the city can do incrementally to try and prevent the further deterioration?
Well, we are trying to squeeze out as much as we can. By the way, I mean, as I said, a bunch of the maintenance money goes to maintaining like the street signals. In fact, I think that for sort of traffic direction maintenance, we're spending somewhat more this year than we are for pavement maintenance. Part of that is that that kind of maintenance is an immediate safety issue. If a street light goes out, I mean, if a traffic signal goes out, that's an immediate safety issue. So there's these other forms of maintenance we have to spend money on. But we are trying to squeeze out as much as we can. For example, I mean, one of the things that we've done in this budget, which is a tough thing to do, that a lot of people in the business community are very upset about, and I can understand their perspective, is we've been spending money for what's called the Downtown Marketing Initiative, about $800,000 a year. We work with PBA and with Travel Portland to market downtown. We did not put that in the PBOT budget this year. I suggested to the mayor that might be something to come out of general fund. He didn't put it in general fund. And a lot of people in PBA are really upset, and I can understand it, because they feel like they had to deal with the city that a chunk of the downtown meter money would go to something in downtown, like marketing downtown. We felt that at this point, continuing to spend that money, given our maintenance deficit, was something that was hard to justify, even though PBA argues they have this agreement. So we are making some tough choices.
In the upcoming budget, the city is going to pay $650,000 to study transit options that include a potential light rail line to Southwest Portland, and PBOT increased its direct financial commitment to youth bus passes by about $300,000. This question is from an Oregon Live reader named PDX Out. How can we take this so-called urgent matter seriously when the city had a $10 million surplus this year and not one dime was used to repair our most dangerous streets?
Well, That was a point of a bit of contention in this year's budget. I actually asked the mayor and my colleagues to put more money, more general fund money into transportation. And actually, the money for the Southwest Corridor study came out of general fund. That was in the mayor's budget. I also asked for some money to go to putting in safety measures at some of the most dangerous crossings in the city. And I argued specifically that we should cut some money out of the Police Bureau's Drugs and Vice unit in order to fund that, because it's my understanding, looking at a lot of research, that arresting drug dealers just because they are drug dealers isn't that useful, because they tend to just be replaced by other drug dealers. The mayor was willing to think about that, but given that the Police Bureau lost over 50 positions last year, he wasn't quite willing to go there. But in the $10 million, I mean, I'll tell you the biggest chunks of where it went. I mean, it went to homelessness, some went to emergency preparedness, some went to parks maintenance. It's not like that we spent it all on, we didn't blow it all on the track, put it that way.
And just to interject, I mean, that goes back to the auditor's point, though, of direct consequences of deferring maintenance in favor of other spending choices. And the commenter's question was, how do we take this seriously when not one dime? You gave us a great explanation about where the money went, but when it comes time to prioritizing, why aren't we prioritizing street maintenance?
Well, because the council has other priorities with general fund dollars, and again, most of it is police, fire, parks, and homeless services. And when you poll Portlanders and ask them, are we spending not enough, too much, or about the right amount on any of those services, you don't get a majority saying that we should cut funding for any of them. So I argued with my colleagues about this, and I argued for more general fund money to go to the streetcar and to safety, et cetera, and I lost, and I suppose I should be really bitter about it, but the truth is I understand that they thought that we needed the money for police and fire and parks and housing.
Okay. So moving on to the street fee itself, you've heard the complaints, it's regressive, but you also said that polling indicated that it was the path to least resistance. As an elected official, how do you decide to push a fee that seems to be diametrically opposed to your own progressive values?
That is an excellent question. Holding my nose and gagging, I guess, is the appropriate response. So we looked at a street fee, which is something that Mayor Adams talked about in 2007, and it's something that 28 other Oregon cities have adopted. And I looked at that and they said, look, I know we can build in a low-income discount and we can have business pay half the costs, but still, I don't like the idea of a fee where people who make $50,000 or even $30,000 and people who make $1 million a year pay the same $12 a month. Let's explore if it's politically possible to do something else. So we asked people, what about an income tax equal to 1/20th of what you pay in your federal income tax, which would be the most progressive option of the ones we tested. 27% of Portlanders said they preferred that. Only 8% said that they strongly preferred that. I was one of the 8%. I wasn't polled, but I would have been. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's that we on the left have done too good a job of convincing people that rich people dodge federal income taxes, when in fact, rich people still do pay more federal income taxes than poor people. We tested a sales tax, which would actually be somewhat more progressive than the street fee, because although sales taxes aren't as progressive as the income tax, rich people do buy more stuff than poor people. And 44% of people said they were violently opposed to that, and another like 20% or something said that they were just opposed, compared to the street fee. So it was something of a process of elimination. So I wound up supporting something saying, because we know that anything we put up might be referred to the ballot by people gathering signatures, and we wanted to think that it had a ghost of a chance. However, we learned, talking about this fee in the last couple of weeks, that there's a lot of people who are concerned by that too. So the mayor and I have said, we're prepared to reopen the conversation. And if somebody will think hard about other, is there a way we can sell a more progressive option? And I'm very open to anybody who can come in and say, here's how I think that we can convince people that an income tax is better, or a sales tax with a low-income rebate is better, or that anything else is better. I mean, I am a desperate man. Look at the fact that I've lost $160 million in the last 18 months. I look at the fact that we get all these requests for safety projects and we have to tell people no. So yes, I'm the guy who was, I think, the only, elected official or near elected who publicly opposed the arts tax because it was regressive it is insane for me to be suggesting the street view would be acceptable. I did it because I felt backed into a corner. If there's some way we can break out of the corner, that's good.
So 2 weeks ago, we were at the park over off of Holgate, and you rolled out your plan. 2 weeks have passed, a lot's happened. But at that time, did you really think that you'd have this approved within 2 weeks?
I thought that we had a decent shot. I mean, I knew that the mayor and I had each other's votes, and Commissioner Fritz said that she was willing to think about it. And we did want to be sure that if somebody sent this to the ballot, it would be in a November even-numbered ballot where you have the biggest electorate, which tends to be the most favorable towards funding public services. So we thought that it was worth taking a shot in order to meet that deadline. And by the way, I don't really feel, even though it made us look like the Keystone Cops, I don't really feel bad about having set a deadline, because the truth is a lot of us are deadline driven, and there's a lot of things that only get done at the last minute, and a lot of people only focus at the last minute. So I think that the fact that we had a deadline, even though we let it slip, brought a lot of people forward to make important points and got us to do work that we might not otherwise have done. So I don't mind letting the deadlines slip, other than look like an idiot, which is fine. But basically the question was, were we going to get Commissioner Fritz's vote? And what happened in the course of the hearings, and Commissioner Fritz, she says this, and I don't know if people believe it, it is true as the day is long. The Commissioner Fritz doesn't make up her mind until she's heard the hearings. So we had people come to the hearings and say, look, we know you've got a low-income discount, but we think it might be difficult for people in multifamily housing to access it, which is true because there's technical reasons for that, just like the water and sewer have a low-income discount that low-income people in multifamily housing aren't able to access. And we had small businesses come to us and say, you have this formula that's based on modeling of how many trips each type of business generates, but my business is just getting going. We're hardly getting anybody visiting us. We think that the model doesn't apply to us. Or some of them saying, we don't think it's fair to do it just on trips. Why don't you do it on profits? So after hearing that testimony, Commissioner Fritz was saying, listen, I think we need to step back and look at this. And after a weekend of reading emails and also talking with Commissioner Fritz, ultimately I concluded that she was right. By the way, I don't know how many people noticed this, but Commissioner Fish and I had an exchange where I was invoking Casablanca, the greatest movie ever made. And it occurred to me that you can use a line in Casablanca to describe almost any situation. And I would describe the exchange I had with Commissioner Fritz over that weekend as I was being Ingrid Bergman and telling her as Humphrey Bogart, I don't know what's right or what's wrong anymore. You'll have to think for all of us, for both of us, for all of us.
So just to be clear, is Commissioner Fritz directly responsible for delaying the vote?
She was certainly, her saying delay the vote made it necessary to delay the vote. Whether I would have come to the same conclusion if it weren't for Commissioner Fritz, I actually don't know. I might have come to the same conclusion, I might not have.
After business pushback, you and Mayor Charlie Hales continued down the path of voting for the residential fee. Now, the business groups will say that the type of business square footage and projected vehicle trips generated is just not a great model. Is that a valid concern?
Well, it's a model that most of the cities in Oregon that have adopted a street fee have used. They say that we're going to use this model, and we might make some adjustments, but it's primarily the basis for the fee. The thing is, you don't actually, unless you have like people counters stationed at each business, you don't know exactly how many people come into a given business. But the Institute of Transportation Engineers has created this model, and they say, look, for a typical business of this type, here's how many people you expect to come through the door, here's how many trips they generate. So I don't think that it's unreasonable. However, I do understand that to some folks in the business community, it kind of seems like black magic. And one mistake we made is that we knew that Mayor Adams in 2007, 2008 had a lot of conversations with the business community, and the impression we had was that, quote, the business community, end quote, was kind of okay with using this modeling. What we learned in the past few weeks is that not everybody in the business community was part of or remembered that 2007, 2008 discussion. So it's possible that after a couple more months of discussion, people might grudgingly come to the conclusion that this model is reasonably fair.
And if they don't, what other alternatives do you have? Or does the city just keep forward on that business component under that model?
There are other alternatives. The city has an existing business profits tax. And when the small business folks were coming and saying, you should base this more on profit, I mean, that's an option. We could raise the business profits tax. I had an exchange with the Portland Business Alliance the other day where one of their high-ranking people said raising the business profits tax is a non-starter with us. So I think that we will see some divisions in the wider business community. There will be the small startup businesses that say it should be based on profits. There are the established profitable businesses that say, no, you're already taxing profits too much. So that is one of the things that I hope is going to happen in the next few months, is that we can pull representatives of various parts of the business community together and come to a solution to which they will give, as the mayor said the other day, grudging acceptance.
Sitting here today, what's your preference?
Well, my personal preference would be to have an income tax equal to approximately 1/20th what you pay in your federal income tax. Maybe I wouldn't mind actually mixing, I mean, I prefer the income tax to the sales tax. There is a particular argument for some form of sales tax when it comes to transportation because people come in and buy stuff in Portland who don't live here. Now, it's not as much as some people might think. The Thomas Lanham, who runs the Revenue Bureau, told me that his best estimate is that 11% of a sales tax would be paid by non-Portlanders. But that's still significant. So I think that, I mean, you could pay for half of what we're going to raise with this fee with a 1/4-cent sales tax, and then have business in some way or another raise the rest of it. That, I mean, for most households with 2 income earners, the cost of that would be about the same as the cost of the arts tax for the average household. It would be about $70 a year for an average household with 2 income earners. So, I mean, people are violently opposed to a sales tax on principle. It might be worth having a bit of that discussion. I mean, I would prefer that, personally, to this street fee.
So part of the argument that you and Mayor Hales have made for implementing the fee is that Portland's roads are in such disrepair that we can no longer wait to act. But under the amendments that were proposed by Commissioner Fritz, the fees would have come in slower in the first 3 years than originally projected. If it's so urgent, why settle for collecting what would amount to about $128 million over 3 years instead of the $164 million?
Well, we couldn't get too far with 2 votes. And Commissioner Fritz made it clear that phasing it in that way was a necessary, although perhaps not sufficient, condition for her vote. And I mean, her feeling was that there'd be greater public acceptance if you phased it in rather than doing it all at once. And I will note that a number of the other cities that adopted the street fee had the same attitude. Oregon City started off with a $4.50 fee, which they've gradually ratcheted up to $11.56. So, but A, we couldn't get there without Commissioner Fritz's vote. B, she might have had, I think she had a reasonable point about public acceptance. It would be better if you phased it in.
What was the rationale for the parking lot exemption?
The parking lot exemption is based totally on the Institute of Transportation Engineers trip allocation model. And the way they see it is parking lots are not a destination. They're somewhere you go on the way to the actual destination, so they don't generate trips. I think that there is a flaw in that, which is that some parking lots are big enough they actually have employees. So employees actually have a destination trip to that parking lot. So one of the things we can do in the next couple of months is figure out how we are going to assign at least some trips to the parking lots. And then, of course, there's the whole issue of the food carts that are in parking lots and their destinations. So we need to deal with that as well.
Going forward, how are you going to figure out how to prioritize or offer exemptions to specific groups, nonprofits, churches, anything like that?
Well, I mean, nonprofits, churches, et cetera, pay utilities. They pay water, they pay sewer, they pay electric bills. So if you're doing a fee that's based on trip generation, then they need to pay. And one of the conversations you have with the lawyers about any kind of exemption is, would we get attacked and be told this isn't really a fee, it's a tax if you did this? One particular reason that's a concern, especially on the personal side, is that with the arts tax, as you might have noticed, we were eventually told it's a tax, not a fee, and therefore people who make all their money from PERS don't have to pay it. So then you have people use that as a political club to beat you with. So we can explore whether the lawyers will let us get away with giving any kind of special treatment to nonprofits or churches. But I will point out that they are paying those other utilities. And actually, I had a conversation with David Leslie of Ecumenical Ministries a few days ago, ran into another event, and I said, why is it that you guys are raising a fuss about the prospect of a transportation utility fee being applied to you? And I haven't heard you making this point about water and sewer. And he said, you know, I guess it's just that water and sewer have always been with us, and this thing is new. And that is, a lot of us react that way. We tend to accept things that have always been there, but then freak out about the same issues with something that's new. It's just kind of human nature.
So you feel as though water and sewer is a direct comparison to transportation and that they're all utilities?
Yes, I do.
Okay. You and Mayor Hales often describe our current situation as a crisis requiring dramatic and immediate action. But at the same time, we've heard from you today saying, I'd prefer to do it another way. It's just not politically feasible. Given that being the case, why not put a sunset on this proposal and allow yourself an option to revisit in 5 to 10 years to see if there's a better solution?
I think that, I would be happy to try to find a different solution in 5 years. I fear that if we put a sunset on it, no matter how we described it, the impression a lot of people would get is, oh, okay, you're not going to need the money in another 5 years. And that would simply not be true. The need for street maintenance is not going to go away. So I'm afraid of putting a sunset on it because I think that it would send the wrong signal.
Okay. Got some questions from the audience. I noticed that 13.3% of PBOT's budget goes toward parking on-street and off-street. Shouldn't the parking program pay for itself? Why subsidize parking?
It does pay for itself, but you have to pay to run the system. Parking generates, I think, about $20 million for us net, but you actually have to operate the garages, you have to have enforcement officers, et cetera. So that's actually an example of when you look at our budget, you say, well, so such a small percentage of it goes to X, but some of the budget goes to things that actually, parking in particular, that actually make money.
Okay. Shifting over to other funding sources, you've said publicly that this is nowhere near enough money to meet the city's maintenance and safety obligations. What other possibilities do we have? Could we do a city gas tax? Could we go down to Salem next year and ask the legislature to increase the gas tax?
We could do that. The legislature has done that a bit in the past. We could do a city gas tax, theoretically. What the polling on that shows nationally and here is that people have this visceral response to the gas tax. They don't like it. And I personally don't mind it. I think maybe it's that people see the price of gas like screaming at them from big billboard-like things, and most people don't know what percentage of it is the tax part. But it's something where it starts off being very unpopular, and you have an interest group at the ready to attack you for it and refer it to the ballot. That's how Mayor Adams' proposal went down 6 years ago. One dapper gas lobbyist named Paul Romaine filed a petition to defeat it, and that was, Sam's shaking his head. He said, so that wasn't the only reason? That was a part of the reason that the fee was withdrawn.
That same opposition exists to the street fee itself, though, so why not a gas tax as opposed to a street fee?
Well, we don't know, actually, if anybody would gather signatures to refer this particular street fee. Paul Romaine, that lobbyist, came and said, this will be referred. He did not say, I will refer it. In fact, none of the specific interest groups that we thought might gather signatures to refer it to the ballot said to us, if you do this, I'm referring it to the ballot. And actually, there's probably a political argument we should have gone ahead because, after all, it's summer, maybe all the lobbyists are on vacation. But because of the concerns that we heard from not lobbyists, but low-income advocates and small businesses, we decided to hold back on it, even though we didn't have that kind of direct threat from lobbyists with the money to gather signatures.
Now, the reason I keep asking about the gas tax is because there is, some people would make the argument that it would provide a fairer distribution of costs for the city streets because people coming in and out of the city, visiting, are paying this gas tax as opposed to just the residents and businesses within the city. What do you think of that?
That is a reasonable argument, although obviously people coming into the city might have bought their gas outside. No, it's the same argument for the sales tax, really. Now, I think as a good environmentalist that there should be a price on carbon. In terms of the fairness of paying for the roads, however, the people who come to the town halls and say it shouldn't be all drivers kind of have a point because all of us use the streets and not all of the damage is caused by passenger cars. In fact, an individual passenger car doesn't cause all that much damage to a street. The TriMet buses, which I wish people rode more, and I wish we had more of them, a typical TriMet bus apparently causes the damage of 11,000 Toyota Camrys. We don't want to start taxing TriMet because for a lot of reasons we want to encourage public transportation. But the passenger car drivers aren't imposing all that much wear and tear on the roads. The weather imposes a lot of wear and tear. And the weather is all of our responsibility. Well, I guess, okay, the drivers are probably contributing to the weather, okay, but it's rain rather than the global warming that's damaging the roads. And people who use transit, people who bike, people who walk, they all do use the roads. And actually, one of the things I was really impressed by is that folks like the Bicycle Transportation Alliance in this process, they said, we think it's okay for our people to pay a fee because we know that the drivers are paying for a big chunk of it through the gas tax, and we recognize we all use the roads.
Another question from the audience. Why not petition Multnomah County to increase vehicle license fee to $43, which is the state max, and Portland get $8 to $25 of the new amount?
Multnomah County just did increase the vehicle license fee to help pay for the Selwood Bridge. And I don't know that Deborah Kafori wants to begin her tenure by proposing yet another raise in it. $18 a year would pay for just a fraction of what we're talking about. I mean, if Multnomah County wants to do that, that would be great. But let's let Deborah settle in a bit first.
You and the mayor have consistently pointed out that 28 other Oregon cities have a similar fee, but I think we can all agree Portland is unique in size and scale. In Oregon, how closely has PBOT looked at what other major U.S. cities are doing to pave and manage streets, and what will you do in the next few months to research that topic?
Well, in a lot of places, I mean, for one thing, the streets are falling apart in a lot of places. Seattle, a couple of years ago, had a measure on the ballot to significantly increase vehicle registration fees because their streets are falling apart and they got killed. What a lot of cities do is fund transportation projects or needs through increases in the sales tax, which we, of course, don't have. Los Angeles, as we speak, is contemplating putting a measure on their ballot this year to raise the sales tax by ½ cent in order to address transportation needs. So that is a fairly common way of dealing with transportation in other cities as a sales tax.
It looks like we have people lined up to start asking questions. Is it time, or do we have time for a few more up here on the stage? It's the protocol. Go ahead. We're passing it over.
Good morning or afternoon. Fred Neal, City Club member.
Hey, Fred.
Steve. It's interesting, when the Mayor Adams had the discussion with Chair Kogan several years ago about transportation funding, that no mention was ever made that over the past 30 years, the city has received more than 90% of Multnomah County's 3 cents per gallon gas tax, which historically has always left the county with a bridge maintenance and replacement deficit. This fact has never been mentioned in public forums or even by the Oregonian. Even the reporter today says, how about raising or having a city gas tax? When the county has a gas tax that the city gets the inordinate share of. If you raise money from some other source, are you prepared to give some portion of those funds back, or the county's gas tax back to them in order to ensure that we preserve Willamette River's bridges?
I think that, I might not have the numbers exactly right, but I think that a 3-cent gas tax raises about $5 billion a year. And right now we're spending $6.5 million a year paying off the debt on the Selwood Bridge, which the county owns. So, like I said, I don't begrudge the county our spending some money in the Selwood Bridge, but we are helping the county out significantly.
Hi, Wynn Wakala, City Club member. I was a principal accountant for the City of Portland back in the 80s, and under Bud Clark, we put together a citizens revenue task force, and they looked at different ways to raise revenue. And what we came up with was increasing the utility tax, which automatically, over a certain percent, it shows up on the utility bill. But it's a nice way to do it because people with more money usually use more utilities. And also, we used the food stamp program. We used their data to send out checks to low income. We figured if someone was on food stamps, they were low income enough, they shouldn't have to pay the utility tax. And as I recall, that's what we used to build the Oregon Convention Center. So that might be something you might want to consider.
I mean, the utility tax, as I said, actually a big chunk of it used to go to transportation, and if the amount that we get from the utility fees had kept up with inflation, we'd get $26 million a year. Now we only get $2 million a year. My assumption is that if we ratcheted up the utility license fees, then you'd have Northwest Natural, PGE, et cetera, being violently opposed, and they obviously have the capacity to send something to the ballot and say the city's raising your gas and electric fees. But to be honest, that's actually not something that we have. I haven't looked at how much you'd have to raise those fees in order to raise the money we want. So if you can convince Greg Cantor and the other heads of those organizations they think that's a fine idea, definitely we consider it. But I mean, maybe I should have that conversation myself.
Over a certain amount, it is automatically passed on to the consumer in their utility tax. Over 4% or over 6%.
Mm-hmm.
Sharon Joy, City Club member. I appreciate your speech all the way through, both the way you give it and the information. What about luxury tax instead of sales tax, for example? Any small improvement in the way we do things saves big bucks and permanently. 45 years ago, maybe, I went to Japan, and they had pre-built sidewalks that you could reuse and everything else, both cheaper putting down, but and easier to. And mercury poisoning or pollution is a big problem with cement when they make it. So, you know, just one little improvement can help too.
I think, I mean, I wouldn't mind having luxury taxes. The problem is that any new form of taxation, you have to sort of ratchet up a new administrative structure. So for example, if we decided we were only going to tax diamond rings and cars that cost over $30,000, then we'd have to create a whole separate new administrative structure in order to administer a tax that I suspect doesn't bring in all that much money.
John Russell, City Club member. I readily acknowledge the need, but my question is whether you're willing to study another alternative that I think has several advantages. One, there's more of a nexus to transportation, and two, it wouldn't be paid by households, and that is a tax on the owners of the land under asphalt parking. The big payers would be the retailers, the people who own the land under the massive mall out in West Hayden Island and so forth.
Well, that is something that we didn't really explore. I think partly because our assumption was that the fee per parking space would be quite high, and you know that powerful, and also people tend to be very protective of parking in general. And you know, whenever we say anything about parking, people go up in flames. I think actually, John, you've told me before it'd be about $75 per space. And also, you know that entities like the Fred Meyers and you know the Goodmans, who actually owns freestanding parking lots, would be prepared to fight it. However, it is an option. There's some environmental argument for it. So I'll tell you what. If you are willing to put up the money to pay for a poll question, and we could drop it into the next poll that somebody does, we'll look around for options, then I'm willing to see what the answers are. And then if it turns out that it has less than 80% support, if you can bring me the list of people who can outspend Greg Goodman and Fred Meyer by 2-to-1 in the campaign, then you got a deal.
Is this behavior modification for people who ask questions? The answer,
Yes. And I have to say, I mean, I haven't really thought it through. What I just said was somewhat facetious. I haven't really thought it through. So I don't want Greg Goodman to be like, you know, emailing me 60 emails the next hour.
will we get a priority on the potholes on our street?
I think that would be a 14th Amendment violation.
Peter Fenner, member of City Club. Steve, I'm not a fan of this tax for all the reasons everybody else has, but I'm beginning to think this is maybe the only alternative. So I'd like to make a couple of suggestions, and if you don't agree with them, I'd like you to explain why you don't, okay? So be thinking about that. So here's my suggestions, and they're designed to motivate the right behavior and reduce pollution and global warming and all the rest of that stuff. So one is that we give people a free ride if they have an annual pass or the equivalent monthly fees for light rail or the streetcar. I had buses in my idea, but you just convinced me that buses maybe aren't going to help the roads any. So that would get more people riding the streetcar. Now, that assumes that the streetcar and the light rail will start enforcing collections, because I don't think they're doing a good job of doing that. So there's a lot of people getting a free ride on those things. Now, the other thing is, the biggest damagers of our roads, as everybody knows, $60 million a year for the state, is studded tires. And you should make the people that pay a fee pay double if they have studded tires, because they cut the life of the roads in half. Those are not the Toyotas that are riding along, not doing damage to the road. They are doing damage.
Funny you should mention that. I happened to have brunch with the Speaker of the Oregon House this last weekend, and I asked her, would she be interested in authorizing counties, at least, to prohibit studded tires? And I said that I can understand why you've got rural counties where people think they need studded tires, even though Minnesota has barred them, where you wouldn't want to prohibit them. But what if you authorize county that wants to ban them, and then if we could get Clackamas and Multnomah and Washington to ban studded tires, that would take care of most of the ones on our local roads. And she did not automatically dismiss the possibility. It was on our city legislative agenda last year to ban studded tires or authorize local bans. It will be on there again, and every time I see a legislator, I bring up that possibility.
I just want to add to that, banning the tires, as I've sent notes to you on, banning the tires is so hard to get passed. It's a lot better to charge them. They do $400 per car per year. Let's charge them.
But how do we find out, I mean, if they're not banned, how do we find out who has them and who's driving on our streets? I think administratively, it's difficult to be chasing people down like that.
Edward Hershey, City Club member. I have a question about the hold your nose theory of revenue generation. We look down our noses here in Portland at Southern Oregon counties that refuse to even tax themselves a little to preserve basic law enforcement. But here we are with a highly regressive arts tax, with regressive property taxes as a result of compression as well as rapid gentrification. And here you are proposing yet another regressive tax in progressive Portland. Why don't we forget about the polls, propose the right kind of progressive taxes for revenue generation, and live with the consequences?
Well, the problem is that the consequences are, if somebody sends something to the ballot and we lose, then remember, we're losing $160 million every 18 months. With the arts tax, maybe arts people will think I'm bad to say this, but with that, we weren't losing $160 million over 18 months. I would have preferred it if the city had sent out something progressive to see if that would pass, even if the polls were against it, rather than sending out something that started off being regressive. But because I'm losing $160 every 18 months, like I said, I'm desperate, and it's driving me to desperate measures. I think I said at OPB last week that I object to this street fee with 96% of the fibers of my being, but I object to continuing to see this maintenance deficit explode and continuing to tell parents who want their kids to be able to walk to school no with 100% of the fibers of my being.
Kurt Wabering, member. I own a home in Northeast, and it's been about 10 years since I've had the house painted, and it's going to cost me, I don't know, $3,000 or something like that to get it painted. So I'm dividing that, it's something like $300 every year that I'm going to have to set aside for eventual painting maintenance. Now, I see that there's a $6 fee. I presume that's monthly.
That would be, in the first year, a $6 monthly fee. It would be lower for people in multifamily housing because they actually generate fewer trips, because like the garbage truck only comes once to a whole bunch of units rather than to each house. And also there'd be a discount if we can figure out a way to apply it to, there'll be a low-income discount, and if we can figure out a way to do it, a low-income discount for people in multifamily housing as well.
Yeah, so I guess my comment really, which is, my question would be that the cost of homeowners' normal maintenance compares. How do you sense it comparing to such a user fee?
Well, you could also look at the cost of car maintenance. The cost of car maintenance for a typical household is, I believe, over $100 a month on average. What the typical household pays in gas taxes and registration fees is right now about $49. With a $12 a month fee, that would go up to $61. And that is real money. I mean, it's not trivial. But $61 is less than the average cable TV bill. And I think that people were asked the question, what would you rather lose, cable TV or the transportation network? I think most people would say cable TV.
Ted Kay, City Club member. Everything you've talked about is raising more money to do the same thing that we've always done.
Actually, it's raising more money to do things that we haven't been doing because we couldn't afford them.
I'm talking about technology. Question for you about technology. There's new ways to pave streets, even the idea of solar roadways, the technology that turns the entire roadway into a solar panel. To what extent is the city looking at that at the same time that it's looking at raising revenue for this?
I actually am not familiar with the solar roadway. We can look into it. I mean, I will say that we are taking advantage of new technology. This substance fog seal, which can extend the life of a street for several years at only $10,000 per lane mile, is something that other cities started using. We hadn't started using it yet. We've decided to start using it. So this is sort of technology, although it's really just coordination. Director Treat said that in the last city she was in, which was Chicago, there was much better coordination between all the public and private utilities and when they tore up the streets, so that you don't see the same street torn up twice in 3 months. So we pulled in all the private utilities as well as water and sewer and asked them, are they willing to join with us in using this kind of software that they use in Chicago to make sure that we coordinate better and we don't have that kind of duplicative effort.
Tom Karwacki, City Club member. The 7,000 streetlights converted to LEDs, I've always heard that you would save $6 million per year if you converted all of them. How much will you be saving there? And you only have $500,000 a year or less going to bridge resilience. Would those be Portland City bridges, or would those be the Multnomah County bridges across the Willamette?
We actually do have our own bridges to maintain. We are working with PGE, et cetera, to figure out how we start converting to LEDs. We were thinking of setting aside a pot of money to maybe help Multnomah County retrofit at least one of the downtown bridges, probably the Burnside, to be earthquake resistant.
Excuse me, is this microphone on? Can you turn this? There, the mic is on. We have run out of broadcast time for further questions, and we'll have to stop for the day. And as we close, please join me in offering our sincere thanks to Commissioner Steve Novick and moderator Brad Schmidt. Thanks for listening, and be sure to join us next week.